Hello, welcome back. Welcome to Creative Quilting the K-Way. We're on episode 5, and this time we're going to be talking about some rotary cutting methods where we're going to cut some angles, some half square triangles and some quarter squares. We're going to use a pattern to do that. We're going to use one called Flower Hour. And we're just going to use the pattern so that it shows us the measurements and things to start with, so we're not just blindly guessing what we want to do. And this pattern says that we need lights and darks. So we need assorted light fabrics and assorted dark fabrics. So what I've pulled out are some fat quarters. Using fat quarters is going to be a great way to show you how to use the cutting mat and the ruler and the rotary cutter in a different way than we learned already. This time we're going to use the cutting mat as our measurement tool. So let's move this to the side here. Let's get one set of fabrics ready. What I've done is I've stacked the fabrics up with the edges lining up on the top, and I'm going to use a line right on the mat for measurement. I'm going to line that up to make sure I'm square right up here on this line. The next measurement I'm going to use, or the line I'm going to use, is this 10 over here on this side. I'm going to make sure that all of my fabrics are extending past that line. And I'm lined up on the top, making sure it's nice and square. The first strips that I need, or the squares we're going to start with for this project, are going to be 7 1/4. So I'm going to use this line on the mat, the 10, go over 7 1/4, which puts me at 17 1/4. I'm going to line up my long ruler with my quarter mark there on the line, and the same thing on the bottom. I'm using the lines on the mat as my measurement. I'm going to use my sharp rotary cutter and make one clean cut all the way down. Now I'm going to need to trim up this side of this, but while I'm here and I've got my fabric all laid out, I'm now going to go ahead and cut my next strips. And my next strip is 5 3/4. On this one, I can go ahead and use my ruler again. So if I go to 5 3/4, lining up just inside the cut, that one thread in, put pressure down on the ruler, and make a nice clean cut. The next measurement I need is 4 1/4. So I'll slide this one out of the way. I will use my ruler again and use 4 1/4. And I can use my ruler again because my ruler is wide enough to accommodate. It wasn't big enough for that first 7 1/4 cut. So line up my ruler, pressure down, and cut those strips. Now the pattern calls for me to start with squares, so now I need to turn these into squares. But first I need to get a nice clean cut on the other side of this one. So now I'm going to line that cut edge, the edge I already cut up, with the 10. Just because it's easy to remember, that's what I did last time. Making sure it's staying nice and straight because I'm using the mat for my measurement. Going to go over 7 1/4, puts me right at that 17 1/4, lining up my marks here and here, and making the cut. Now at this point, I could continue using the mat to cut the squares, or I could switch to another ruler. I have a wider ruler here, so I'm going to switch to this one. I'm going to rotate my strip. Now I'm not using my cutting mat anymore. I'm going to go back to using the ruler. And I need to make these 7 3/4 inch square. This side is my selvage. I'm going to want to clean that off in a minute, but I'll make sure I have enough there to get a 7 3/4, or 7 1/4, excuse me, 7 1/4. So I can slide back just a smidge. I'm lining up my top line and my bottom line, making a cut. That one I know I need to fix in a minute, but I'll go ahead and make another cut right here, another 7 1/4 square. And because I was using fat quarters, that's all I have out of that one. So I have squares there. I'm going to flip this one around and square this up to 7 1/4. Now the next strip. Those are 7 1/4. These are 5 3/4. So I can use this ruler. I could use a smaller one too, but this one will work just fine. I'm going to go to about 6 there to make sure I get a nice 5 3/4 square. Make a cut and trim it up to 5 3/4. And the pattern calls for more of those, but we're just going to do that many for right now. Now we'll jump to our next strip, which is our 4 1/4 strip. Going to follow the same process. We're going to make sure we have enough on the edge that we're covering all the ends over there, lining it up, and making it 4 1/4 square, staying just inside that cut edge. We'll set this aside for now. Now the pattern calls for light and dark, so I need to do the same process on my dark fabrics. We're going to line up that top edge with a line on our mat. We're going to bring the edge over to the 10 because that's an easy one to see. We're going to use our long ruler and we're going to measure over 7 1/4, which is that 17 1/4 mark. Pressure down on the ruler and make that cut. The next one is going to be 5 3/4. I'm going to go back to using the ruler because it's wide enough. 5 3/4, lined up on the side, lined up on the top. Then the next one is 4 1/4. Line that right up and zip right down the side. Now let's get some squares from this so we can do the next part of the process. I need to flip my big strip around, put it on the 10. 17 1/4 was our measurement we were looking at. Zip off the side. Rotate it. I'm going to switch to this fatter ruler again. Line up the line on the top, making sure we're staying nice and square. Flip it around to get our 7 1/4 inch square. And take our next strip. So make sure I slide that over far enough. Make a cut. Rotate. Line it up on 5 3/4. Last strip set. So we need 4 1/4 here. Make sure I'm going far enough down. Rotate these around to 4 1/4 and make the cut. Now the next step that we do in this pattern is we are going to layer light and dark squares. I'm going to make quarter cuts. So I'm going to turn this into 4 pieces. I'm going to use my longer ruler. It'll be easier to read. Looking at my 45-degree angle because I'm cutting point to point. I'm going to line that up on the edge of the fabric, making sure I'm going through each point. And I'm going to make 1 cut. Then I'm going to need to rotate this. This is where it could be handy to have one of the mats that rotates around. I'll get that out in a second, but I'll show you what you can do without one. Line up my 45-degree angle on the side, make that cut. Now I have 4 pieces from the 1 square that I cut. We're going to continue to do that with all sizes of these. So I'll pull out my rotating mat for this one. The next size square, a dark on the bottom and a light on the top. Layer them, corners together, making sure they're nice and aligned. Make the cut. I'm going to rotate my mat so everything stays nicely in place. And make the cut. We continue to do this through all sizes of the quilt, the different sizes of the squares. What this does is it has our pieces all ready so that we can stack them up and get them ready to take right over to the sewing machine and sew them. So that's cutting quarter squares. And that pattern that we were going to use for that is right down here. It's called Flower Hour. All hourglass blocks for that one. Another thing we could do for these, if we were doing half squares instead of quarter squares, let's take one of our small sets, and if I wasn't doing the quarter cut, many patterns will call for just one cut, right like this. The difference in these cuts is that on this one, our bias edges are on the inside, here and here, and we have straight grain there. This one, we're going to have bias on the long edge, we're going to have straight grain on two sides. So bias two sides, straight grain two sides. You're going to use different ones for different patterns. So that's cutting half squares and quarter squares. Another thing we might have to do sometime in a pattern is start with a strip set. And it might call for us to make half square triangles with it. The ruler that we can use, there are many on the market, different angles, different things we can use, but this little ruler would work great for this. And we used the bottom line to line it up on the bottom. We can take a little cut like that. We can flip it around. See the little blacked out point? That sticks off your strip set. You line it up and make your next cut. Flip it around and you make your next cut. Once again, we've got our fabrics already stacked so they're ready to move to the sewing machine and sew them right away. Makes it easier than dealing with individual triangles. So that's another method of cutting with a ruler at an angle. There's yet another thing we may have to do sometimes in our patterns. We may need templates. And I've got two patterns with templates. One is called